creepypasta. I still don't know if I should tell anyone about that night. Who would believe me anyway? But maybe if I write it all down, I'll be able to make some sense of what happened. It all started like a normal evening. 5 of us gathered at Olivia's house for dinner. Her old Victorian house was the perfect place for cozy get-togethers. The wooden floors creaked just enough to be charming, and the dim light from antique lamps filled the room with a soft, amber glow. Olivia was an amazing cook, so when she invited me, I didn't hesitate. By the time I arrived, the others, Mark, Julia, and Emma, were already there. The table was beautifully set, heavy silverware, delicate porcelain plates, and candles flickering in the center. Olivia had clearly gone all out. We laughed and chatted while waiting for dinner to finish cooking. The smell of roast chicken and garlic filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of burning wax. But something felt off. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way the shadows from the candles seemed too long, the way the floor creaked behind me when no one was there. I blamed it on my own nerves. It had been a stressful week. Then Olivia brought out the food. Everything looked delicious, and the wine was flowing. We were in the middle of talking about Julia's vacation plans when I noticed something strange. The chicken on my plate. It didn't look right. I couldn't figure out why. It wasn't undercooked or spoiled, but it seemed to shimmer faintly in the light, as if something alive was moving under the skin. "Are you okay?" Olivia asked, her eyes drilling into me. I realized I'd been staring at my plate too long. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. Just zoned out. But when I picked up my fork and knife, the strangest thing happened. I swear the chicken twitched. Just a little, a small shudder, like it was trying to move. I froze, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. "What's wrong?" Mark asked. Everyone was looking at me now. "Nothing," I lied, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I cut a small piece and took a bite, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. It tasted fine, but there was something else, a faint metallic tang, almost like blood. I pushed my plate away. "You're not eating," Olivia said, her voice sharp. "I'm just not hungry," I said, avoiding her eyes. Suddenly, the room felt too warm, the air heavy. Olivia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I worked hard on this meal, you know." "I know, it's great, The lights flickered, cutting me off. For a moment, the room plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the dining room had changed. The shadows on the walls were darker, deeper, and they seemed to ripple, almost alive. The air grew cold, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The others acted as if nothing had happened. Julia laughed at something Mark had said, and Olivia kept sipping her wine, her eyes fixed on me. Then I noticed Emma. She hadn't said a word for a while, and when I glanced at her, I understood why. She was staring straight ahead, her face pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her hand gripped her fork so tightly her knuckles were white. "Emma?" I whispered. She didn't respond. She just kept staring, her mouth slightly open. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there. Just the old wallpaper peeling slightly at the edges. "Emma, are you okay?" Julia asked, her voice concerned. Emma blinked, as if waking from a trance. She shook her head like she was clearing a fog. "Yeah, I'm fine, just zoned out." But she wasn't fine, none of us were. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The wine tasted bitter, the candles burned lower, and the shadows seemed to crawl closer. I kept glancing at the others, trying to figure out if they felt it too. But no one said anything. Olivia, especially, seemed perfectly calm. Too calm. By the time dessert was served, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the room was unbearable. I pushed my chair back and stood. "I think I should get going," I said, trying to sound casual. "So soon?" Olivia asked, her voice sweet but with an edge that twisted my stomach. "Yeah, early morning tomorrow," I mumbled, grabbing my coat. No one protested. They barely even acknowledged me as I left. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. I walked to my car and climbed in, gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the house. Olivia was standing at the window, watching me, but it wasn't her face I saw. It was her smile, wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her teeth glinted sharply in the faint light. I drove faster, refusing to look back again. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Olivia's face, her smile, the way the shadows in her house had seemed alive. I haven't spoken to any of them since. I'm too afraid of what they might say or what they might not. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear it. A faint creak, like someone walking across a wooden floor. And I can't help but wonder, did I ever really leave Olivia's house? Or did some part of me stay behind? Next story. It was a cold, misty evening in a quaint, old-fashioned town. The streets were eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Jamie had recently moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The house had a sinister reputation for being haunted, but Jamie dismissed such tales as mere superstition. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the dusty attic, Jamie discovered a hidden diary behind a loose floorboard. The book was worn and covered in dust, with the faint name Emily embossed on the leather cover. The diary belonged to a girl who had lived in the house over a century ago. As Jamie began reading the pages, a chilling story unfolded. Emily wrote about a strange figure that visited her at night. She described it as a tall, shadowy man with glowing red eyes. He would stand at the foot of her bed, silently watching as she tried to sleep. Her parents didn't believe her, dismissing her fears as childish imagination. But one night, Emily wrote, the figure came closer than ever before. She could feel its cold breath against her face, and its burning eyes seemed to pierce into her very soul. The next entry abruptly ended, leaving Jamie with a growing sense of unease. A shiver ran down Jamie's spine. Suddenly, the attic's temperature dropped dramatically, and the air grew thick and oppressive. Jamie looked up, heart pounding, and froze. In the corner of the room stood a tall, shadowy figure. Its glowing red eyes burned like coals in the darkness. Paralyzed by fear, Jamie couldn't move. The figure slowly began to approach, its footsteps echoing ominously in the silent attic. When it extended a cold, skeletal hand, Jamie snapped out of the trance and bolted for the stairs, leaving the diary and the haunting presence behind. Jamie never returned to the attic, and the house remained steeped in mystery. To this day, locals claim that on cold, misty nights, a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes can still be seen standing in the attic window, waiting for its next victim. Next story. The Amazon had been a symphony of senses. The vibrant green of the jungle canopy, the deafening roar of the river, the intoxicating scent of exotic blooms. It had been the perfect escape from the sterile world of Marston and Associates, where I, a rising star in the legal world, was slowly suffocating under the weight of ambition. My recent promotion, a testament to years of relentless work, should have been a cause for celebration. Instead, it felt like a gilded cage, trapping me in a suffocating routine. But since my return, a disquiet had settled over me, a subtle dissonance in the harmony of my life. It began subtly, a faint itch on my left arm, just below the elbow. A mere mosquito bite, I dismissed it, a trivial annoyance amidst the whirlwind of my return. I slathered on ointment, swallowed an antihistamine, and tried to ignore the insistent tugging beneath my skin. But the itch wouldn't relent. It festered, a malevolent seed taking root. 2 days later, the innocuous red spot had transformed, swelling into a throbbing mass. The skin around it burned, as if something alive was writhing beneath the surface. At the office, the agony was unbearable. I shifted constantly in my chair, my focus shattered by the desperate need to scratch. My blouse, a symbol of my professional success, now felt like a suffocating shroud, the fabric igniting the inflamed skin with every movement. "Elizabeth, are you okay?" Clara, a coworker, asked, her voice cutting through the low hum of office chatter. "Just an allergy, nothing serious," I lied, forcing a smile, though the effort felt like a physical strain. She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but didn't press further. I knew I was drawing attention. Mr. Marston, my boss, frequently walked past my desk, watching me out of the corner of his eye. I couldn't let this jeopardize my promotion, but the pain was becoming unbearable. When the workday finally ended, I rushed home, eager to escape the prying eyes of my colleagues and the stifling confines of the office. I slammed the door to my apartment, dropped my bag, and went straight to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and rolled up my sleeve. My heart froze. Where there had been a small red mark, there was now a dark swelling with a black, hardened center, like tree bark. The skin around it was cracked, oozing a yellowish liquid. with a nauseating smell. It was as if my skin was rotting before my eyes. I grabbed the strongest ointment I had, but as soon as I touched the wound, the pain exploded. I screamed, tears streaming down my face, the sound echoing through the empty apartment. The next morning, I went straight to the hospital. I wasn't the kind of person to wait until the last minute to seek help. My mother used to say, "Elizabeth, you're so paranoid you'll die of old age because nothing will ever catch you off guard." At the hospital, the doctor examined the wound with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. He called in another doctor, who then called in 2 more. They all stared at my arm like it was a nightmare brought to life. "It's a tropical disease," the doctor said after several long minutes, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "We'll run some tests." They sent me home with antibiotics and painkillers, but I knew that wasn't enough. Something was growing inside me, something alien and terrifying, and I was powerless to stop it. That night, I woke up to an excruciating pain, a sensation that burrowed deep beneath my skin, a living thing writhing beneath the surface. I bolted upright, gasping for air, and rushed to the bathroom mirror. Tearing off the bandages, I recoiled in horror. The small wound had transformed, now a gaping crater filled with a viscous yellow substance that pulsed with an eerie life of its own. In the center, something moved. My hands trembled as I grabbed a pair of tweezers, my fingers numb with fear. With a shudder, I plunged them into the depths of the wound. Something wriggled beneath the surface, a cold, slimy resistance. I pulled, and a creature emerged, a small white worm, writhing and contorting between the metal prongs. I flung it into the sink, the sight of it nearly sending me into a paroxysm. But as I stared back at the wound, a sickening realization dawned. There were more. So many more. The following days were a descent into a living hell. I woke up drenched in sweat, my head pounding like a drum, the phantom pain radiating outwards from the infected site. The wound, once a mere blemish, had become a gaping maw, devouring the surrounding flesh, leaving behind a trail of raw, bleeding tissue. My clothes clung to my arm, soaked with the viscous fluid that oozed from the ever-widening crater. Hours were spent staring into the grotesque reflection in the mirror, watching the wound writhe and pulsate. Small ripples like waves on a polluted lake disturbed the surface of the decaying flesh, a chilling testament to the unseen creatures beneath. By the 3rd day, the futile struggle became apparent. I would pull out 1, 2, sometimes even 3 of the writhing worms, only to have them replaced by others. It was an endless cycle of extraction and renewal, a grotesque dance of death played out on my own flesh. Sleep had become a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt them, the unseen creatures, burrowing deeper, their movements a grotesque symphony beneath my skin. I spent sleepless nights on the bathroom floor, a grotesque tableau of self-inflicted torment. Tweezers, needles, anything I could find was pressed into the gaping wound, desperate to extract the invaders. For every one I removed, 2 seemed to take its place, a relentless tide of parasites overwhelming my defenses. And then there was the sound. At first, I dismissed it as a figment of my fevered imagination, a hallucination born of terror. But it was real, a low, wet rustling, emanating from within my arm, the sound of something scraping against bone, chewing, burrowing. By the 5th day, the nightmare reached a terrifying crescendo. My left hand went numb, the fingers unresponsive to my will. I stared in horror as the swelling spread, the skin becoming translucent, revealing long, white shapes writhing beneath, rivers of larvae flowing through my veins. I retched, bile stinging my throat. The stench of vomit mingled with the sickening sweetness of decay emanating from my arm, making the air unbreathable. I knew then that I was losing the battle. They were growing, multiplying, consuming me from within, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I knew this was the end. The creatures, once confined to my arm, were now spreading, taking over my entire body. I was no longer human. I was simply a vessel, a host for this alien infestation. And as I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, I felt a chilling sense of acceptance. This was my fate, to become one with the infection, to be consumed by the darkness that had taken root within me. My skin, now a sickly shade of greenish gray, glistened with a damp, oily sheen. I called an Uber, the ride to the hospital a blur of nausea and dread. As I waited for the car, I tried to cover my arm with a scarf, but the fabric quickly became soaked with the viscous, yellowish fluid that seeped from the ever-widening wound. I climbed into the car, my apologies for the smell preempting any greeting. "Good morning," I croaked, my voice hoarse and strained. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly expression, smiled through the rearview mirror. His smile faltered, however, as the sickly sweet odor reached him. "Are you all right?" he asked, wrinkling his nose and quickly cracking open the window. "It's just an infection," I mumbled, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. He nodded but kept the window open throughout the short ride, his eyes darting nervously in the rearview mirror. I could see the disgust in his eyes, the way he subtly averted his gaze, the way he rubbed his nose repeatedly. It was as if I was some kind of leper, a walking contagion. The smell was intensifying, a cloying stench of decay that clung to me like a shroud. As I staggered through the hospital doors, I felt the eyes of the waiting room upon me, a sea of pitying glances and averted gazes. People instinctively moved away, some covering their mouths, others wrinkling their noses in disgust. I was ushered directly into the emergency room. The doctor who had examined me before, his face now etched with a mixture of concern and revulsion, greeted me. He could barely conceal his own reaction to the odor emanating from me. "Elizabeth, what happened?" he asked, his voice strained as he donned gloves and a surgical mask. I don't know. It's getting worse. It's growing." He looked at my arm, and a low gasp escaped his lips. It was no longer a wound. It was a grotesque crater, a gaping maw in my flesh filled with necrotic tissue and pulsing with an unnatural life. The edges were a writhing mass of tiny worms, burrowing in and out, a sickening spectacle that seemed to defy the laws of nature. "We need to act immediately." "This is no longer just an ordinary infection," he said, his voice grave, as he called for assistance. I was rushed into the operating room, the faces of the nurses a mixture of professional detachment and raw horror. They tried not to stare, but I could feel their eyes on me, their gaze lingering on the monstrous wound. The room was frigid, the harsh glare of the surgical lights reflecting off the cold, metallic instruments. "We'll need to amputate the arm, Elizabeth," the doctor said, his voice heavy with grim certainty. He held my remaining hand, his touch a cold comfort against the icy fear that gripped me. "There's no other option. It's spreading too quickly." I simply nodded, a single, chilling word escaping my lips. "Do it." The strength to protest, to even argue, had long since abandoned me. All I craved was an end to the torment. They sedated me, a merciful veil descending over the horror. But even through the haze of the anesthetic, I felt the scalpel bite into my flesh. Then, a sound that would forever be etched in my memory. A collective gasp. A chorus of horrified screams that echoed through the sterile confines of the operating room. Larvae rained down. From the gaping wound, a torrent of writhing, translucent worms erupted, a grotesque eruption that showered the sterile field. They were larger now, monstrous in their size and ferocity, their movements a frenzy of desperate escape. Nurses recoiled, some screaming, others dropping instruments with clattering metallic shrieks. The air, thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood, was filled with the sound of their panicked retreat. "My God," murmured the doctor, his voice a mere whisper against the cacophony of terror. The worms, freed from the confines of my flesh, rained down upon the sterile floor, a grotesque carpet of writhing life. They slithered across the polished tiles, disappearing beneath the operating table, crawling towards the feet of the horrified medical staff. The stench intensified, a suffocating wave of decay that threatened to overwhelm them all. The doctor, his face pale, continued the amputation with a renewed sense of urgency. But as he sawed through the bone, a new wave of worms erupted from the wound, a torrent of writhing life that defied all logic. They seemed to be multiplying, emerging from the depths of my flesh, burrowing through the muscle and bone with an unsettling speed. One of the creatures, emboldened by the chaos, crawled up the doctor's glove, its cold, slimy body a chilling reminder of the horror that had consumed me. "Get this off me," he shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. The operating room had descended into chaos. The floor was a macabre tableau of blood, pus, and writhing worms. Surgical instruments lay scattered, forgotten amidst the pandemonium. The nurses, their faces contorted in terror, stumbled back, unsure of where to run. I could feel them moving beneath my skin, a legion of unseen creatures burrowing deeper, spreading throughout my body. "Doctor," I whispered, my voice barely a rasp. "It's no use, they're everywhere." He looked at me, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. For a fleeting moment, I thought he would faint. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry." And then darkness. I awoke with a start, gasping for air. My hands, once familiar, now felt alien, the skin riddled with tiny holes. I looked down and a wave of nausea washed over me. Worms, hundreds of them, were wriggling in and out of the pores, the flesh of my hands undulating like a living, breathing mass. I was no longer human, just a vessel, a host for this alien infestation. Next story. Are you ready, Ash? Esther appeared at my door, her favorite nightgown, a splash of color against the muted tones of our apartment. A mischievous glint danced in her eyes, her excitement palpable. "Tonight," she declared, "we're going to the weirdest event you'll ever attend." A week ago, Esther, my roommate, had casually dropped a bombshell. "Hey Ash, want to go to a ghost auction?" The name itself had sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. "I'm sorry, the what auction?" I asked, frowning. "Ghost," she repeated, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. I lived in a shared apartment with two other women, Esther, my kindred spirit, and Ellie, our resident skeptic. While Ellie steadfastly avoided anything remotely spooky, Esther and I shared a morbid fascination with all things macabre. Our shared love for horror films had blossomed into a full-blown obsession. We devoured countless B-movies, visited every haunted house within a 50-mile radius, even attempted to pen a truly terrifying screenplay. It was ambitious. And, of course, we dabbled in the occult, once attempting to contact the other side with an Ouija board, the experience leaving us more amused than spooked. Our horror-related experiences grew increasingly bizarre, each one darker and creepier than the last. So you can imagine my excitement when she asked me to join her at the ghost auction. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. It's an event where ghosts, or spiritual entities, are placed inside glass tanks and auctioned off to the highest bidder, Esther explained, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Define best ghosts," I said skeptically. "I mean, they were ghosts." "I have no idea," she replied, her voice filled with a mischievous glint. "That's exactly why I was so curious to attend. That's all the information available on the event's website." A cryptic description I stumbled upon deep within the dark web. Our journey there was anything but straightforward. We switched cars several times, each driven by a different member of the event's crew. Our progress, a series of clandestine handoffs shrouded in an air of secrecy. The windows were permanently blackened, the outside world a blur of fleeting images. By the time we arrived, I was thoroughly disoriented, my sense of direction completely lost. The building itself was something out of a gothic horror film, a stark contrast to the mundane world we had left behind. The guests, impeccably dressed in tuxedos and gowns, moved through the opulent halls with an air of restrained excitement, creating an atmosphere that was both surreal and unsettling. "Miss Esther, invitee number 201?" asked the man guarding the gate, his eyes scanning a list of names. "The one and only," Esther replied confidently, flashing him a dazzling smile. We walked in after the man pinned a crimson, strangely shaped ribbon to her dress. "Why didn't he pin one on my dress too?" I whispered, slightly confused. "Because the invitation is under my name, and I'm allowed to bring a plus one, a companion," she said with a shrug. "In fact," she added, "it's mandatory for a first-timer's invitation to be accepted." The main hall was breathtakingly grand, like an auction house for priceless art. I couldn't believe the spectacle, so much effort, so much anticipation, all for ghosts. The ghosts themselves were displayed along the walls in cylindrical glass tanks, each about the size of a 1-liter soda bottle. Each tank had a mechanical lid on the top and bottom, as if designed to contain something far more volatile than a mere spirit. Inside each ghost floated like a wispy, translucent figure, a haunting reminder of mortality. I examined them one by one, intensely curious. What made one ghost more desirable than another? Were some more mischievous, more talkative, more powerful? "How are they special?" I asked Esther, my voice a hushed whisper in the hushed atmosphere of the hall. "They just look like regular human ghosts to me. Sure, they seem to be of different ages, races, appearances, and attires, but that's about it, from what I can tell." Esther's eyes gleamed with excitement. "What's special about them?" she replied, is simply the fact that they are ghosts. She grinned. Ashley, imagine having one of these in your house, on a desk next to your TV. When guests visit, they won't see a goldfish in a bowl or a cat in a cage. They'll see this. How many people do you know with a ghost as a conversation piece? I had to admit, it was a strange and intriguing idea. We took our seats in the front row, right near the stage where the auctioneer would soon present the ghosts. As I settled in, I realized I needed a quick restroom break. Before it starts, I think I need to get to the restroom first, I told Esther, as I stood back up. Take care of yourself, Ash, she said, her tone oddly serious. In our 3 years of friendship, I'd never heard her sound so attentive. In the restroom, I was inside one of the stalls when 2 women entered. Their voices echoed as they chatted right outside of my door. It's really crowded tonight, one of them said. There are a lot of new invitees today. The other responded, aren't there just about 12 or so? The new invitees, yeah, but they have to come in pairs to be accepted for their first event, remember? That's how it was for us back in the day, so that makes 24 in total. Oh yeah, I remember now. It was so long ago for us, I almost forgot. I could see their heels through the gap under the door as they washed their hands and adjusted their makeup. It's mandatory to bring a +1 to be accepted for your first event. One of them continued. Secrecy is everything. Her friend added, we all have to hold the same secret to make sure nothing gets leaked. My chest tightened. Something about their conversation made me uneasy. Yeah, understandably, her friend replied. For our first invitation to be accepted, we first-timers are required to bring our very first future ghosts with us to this event. Our companion's soul would be extracted at the event, turning them into ghosts and placing them inside a small glass tank. We first-timers are only allowed to watch, not to participate in the auction. My blood ran cold. But we are allowed to bring home a souvenir, though. The companion we brought to the event, we are allowed to take them home as a ghost, inside a small glass tank. I shivered, a wave of nausea washing over me. Horror consumed me almost instantly. One of the women continued speaking as they turned off the faucet. I still have mine at home. Next story. I recently went to Goodwill to buy some furniture for my empty apartment in New York. Everything here is ridiculously expensive. So when I found a cool, peach-toned vintage chair with a dragon design on it, and it was half off, I knew I had to grab it. Once I got it home, I placed it snugly between my tiny fireplace and my work desk. As I was setting it up, I noticed even more interesting details on the chair. Faint brown patches, a few marks, and a large scratch that almost looked like a scar. My cat loved it too. The moment he saw it, he climbed in and promptly took a nap. Just then, I got a call from a new client. I'm a private investigator, and she was asking if I had any updates on Rain Max, her pop star sister who went missing 3 weeks ago. In cases where celebrities disappear, they're either found by a fan within hours or declared dead. But this case was different. There was no evidence of either outcome, which made it even more unsettling. There's nothing new yet, I said. I'm doing everything I can, and I'll keep looking. It's my job. I just want her to be okay, she replied, her voice trembling. I miss her so much. I know things are tough right now. If you'd like, I can refer you to a therapist, I offered gently. 2 weeks passed, and there was still no progress on Rain's case. No leads, no witnesses, no one coming forward. The silence was deafening. To make matters worse, my cat had gone missing. After a long, stressful day of searching for leads, I finally returned home, eager for some peace. Pouring myself a glass of wine, I sank into my new chair, hoping to relax. As I adjusted the pillow behind my back, I noticed something strange. There was a new patch on the chair, orange and furry. It reminded me of my missing cat. The memory of him curling up on this very chair just before he disappeared came rushing back. Next story. I've worked at the Texas State Archives for 15 years, primarily handling land grant records and settling property disputes from the early days of Texas statehood. Most people might consider it dull, but I've always found a quiet satisfaction in piecing together the stories of those who carved out lives in this unforgiving land. At least, that's how I felt, until I started investigating the Whitaker Ranch murders. It began with a simple land deed dispute. An oil company was trying to establish mineral rights dating back to 1902, and they needed me to verify the chain of ownership. Routine work, or so I thought. But as I combed through the old records, I kept stumbling upon references to a place the locals called the Deadland, a stretch of ranch property out in Palo Pinto County that no one dared to buy for nearly 40 years. The original deed revealed that the land belonged to Clayton Whitaker, who had moved his family from Tennessee in 1898. The records painted a vivid picture. Whitaker, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, Josiah, Mary, Samuel, and little Rebecca, and Sarah's elderly father, Ezekiel. Together, they built a thriving cattle operation, managing to weather even the devastating drought of 1901 that had forced many other ranches to shut down. But something changed in the winter of 1902. The first strange document I came across was a letter from Clayton to the county sheriff, dated January 15, 1902. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the desperation in his words was unmistakable. Sheriff Masters, the singing must stop. My children can't sleep. Sarah says it's just the wind in the canyon, but the wind doesn't sing hymns in a woman's voice. Please send someone. The cattle refuse to graze on the north pasture now. The sheriff's response was preserved too, a dismissive note about how the winter wind plays tricks on a man's mind. But then I came across another letter, this one from Sarah to her sister in Tennessee, dated February 3rd. Dearest Martha, Pa won't come out of his room anymore. He says he sees her standing in the corner at night, just watching. The same woman from the photographs, he says, but we don't have any photographs in this house except the one of Ma, and that burned up during the move. Clayton found boot prints in the snow yesterday. They led from the North Canyon right up to Rebecca's window, but they only went one way, like someone walked up to that window and then just vanished. The children won't stop talking about the lady who sings to them at night. Mary drew a picture of her. I burned it. Some things shouldn't be put to paper. Please write back soon. Your loving sister, Sarah. The next document was a cattle sale record. Through February and early March, Clayton sold off his entire herd at prices well below market value. The buyer's notes mentioned that the cattle were spooked useless and won't feed properly. Then came the gap. 6 weeks of nothing. No records, no letters, no sale documents, just silence. Until April 28, 1902, a single-page report from Sheriff Masters rode out to the Whitaker place on account of no one seeing them at market the past month. Found the house empty. The table was set for breakfast, food rotting on the plates. No sign of struggle. No blood. No tracks leading away from the house despite the mud from recent rains. Found the following items of note. All family boots, shoes present by the door. All horses in the barn, properly fed, Sarah's Bible open on the kitchen table to Psalms 23. Children's beds made, toys put away neatly. Clayton's rifle still mounted above the fireplace, Ezekiel's reading chair still warm. Unable to locate any member of the Whitaker family. No signs of foul play evident. Local men are refusing to join the search party, claiming the land is cursed. The investigation will continue. That was the last official document about the Whitakers. The land went unclaimed, passing to the county after 7 years. 3 different families tried to ranch it between 1910 and 1940. None stayed longer than a month. I thought that was the end of the story, just another mysterious disappearance in the vast Texas frontier. But last week, I found something that changed everything. I was helping digitize a collection of old-school records when I came across a composition book from 1902. It belonged to Mary Whitaker, turned in to her teacher just 2 weeks before the family vanished. Inside was a child's drawing that made my blood run cold. It depicted their ranch house, carefully drawn in pencil. But in every window, the same figure appeared, a woman in a long dark dress, her face a black void. And behind the house, dozens more of the same figure, standing in rows like a congregation. At the bottom, in a child's unsteady hand, were the words, "They sing to us every night now. Mama says don't listen, but how can we not? They say soon we'll learn all the words, and then we can join them. Papa tried to board up the windows, but they just walk through the walls now. Rebecca already knows most of the hymn. She hums it in her sleep. I don't want to learn the words, but I can't stop listening." I've requested access to more school records from 1902, hoping to find the rest of Mary's compositions. But the county clerk called yesterday and said the strangest thing. Apparently, there was a fire in the archive room last night. A small one, quickly contained. But it only burned one shelf, the one containing all the school records from that year. The clerk also mentioned something else. She said that right before the fire started, several people in the building reported hearing what sounded like singing. Like a hymn, she said, but not one they knew. And it seemed to be coming from inside the walls. I'm headed out to the old Whitaker place tomorrow. The land's still empty. Seems even the oil companies won't touch it. I know I should just leave this alone, stick to my quiet job organizing land deeds. But I keep thinking about that drawing, about those figures standing in rows. And every night since I found that composition book, I've been waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. because something's humming an unfamiliar hymn outside my bedroom window. I'll write more when I get back from the ranch. If anyone's reading this and I don't return, stay away from the North Canyon. And whatever you do, don't listen to the singing. The ranching communities of Texas have their own kind of silence. It's different from city quiet or forest quiet. It's a vast, pressing kind of emptiness that makes you aware of just how alone you are. But the silence I encountered when I pulled up to the old Whitaker property was something else entirely. It was wrong. No wind whistled through the canyon, no birds, not even insects. Just a dead, heavy silence that seemed to swallow every sound my boots made on the dried grass. The house still stood, if you could call it standing. Over 100 years of Texas weather had taken its toll, but the basic shape remained. 2 stories of weathered wood, a sagging porch, empty windows like dead eyes staring out at nothing. The wood had turned a strange color, not the silvery gray of normal weathering, but a deep, almost black hue that made the whole structure look as if it had been scorched. I'd brought my camera, notebook, and a copy of the original property survey from 1898. According to the plans, there should have been a barn about 50 yards behind the house. Nothing was left of it now except some foundation stones and a single vertical beam that looked like a gallows in the late afternoon light. The front door hung off its hinges. As I approached, I noticed something odd about the weathering pattern on the wood. Long, parallel grooves ran down its surface, about shoulder height, like someone or something had dragged their fingers down it. Over and over and over again. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I entered, even though I was trying to be as careful as possible. The inside was what you'd expect. Debris, rotting furniture, leaves blown in through broken windows. But there was something else. A smell. Not decay, mold, or anything natural. It reminded me of church, that mix of old wood, candle wax, and what my grandmother used to call the smell of devotion. I found the kitchen exactly as Sheriff Masters had described it in his report. The table was still there, 6 chairs arranged around it. The settings were long gone, but I could see dark stains in the wood where plates had sat for over a century. Sarah's Bible was gone, but there was a dark stain on the table where it had been. A perfect rectangle, as if the wood had been permanently shadowed. That's when I heard it. Just at the edge of hearing. A sound like someone humming. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I checked my phone to record it, but the battery was dead. Funny, since I charged it fully before leaving town. The humming grew louder as I climbed the stairs, each step an agonizing creak in the silence. The children's rooms were on the 2nd floor, according to the house plans. Mary and Rebecca's room was first on the right. The door was closed. The wood around the door frame was covered in those same parallel grooves I'd seen on the front door, but these were deeper, more desperate. Inside, 2 small iron bed frames still stood against the walls. Between them was a toy chest, its lid open. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam shaking slightly. Inside, beneath a layer of dust and debris, lay a single item, a child's composition book. My heart nearly stopped. It was identical to the one I'd found in the archives, but this one was intact. On the cover, in faded ink, Rebecca Whitaker, age 6. I shouldn't have opened it. Everything in my body was screaming at me to leave to get out while I still could, but I had to know. The first few pages were what you'd expect. Practice letters, simple sums, little drawings of horses and cattle. But about halfway through, the entries changed. The handwriting became more precise, more adult, and the same words over and over, filling page after page. I hear them singing. I hear them singing. I hear them singing. The final page was different. A single sentence written in what looked like dried brown ink. Now I'm singing too. The humming was much louder now. It had structure, melody, words just beneath the threshold of understanding. And it wasn't coming from everywhere anymore. It was coming from the corner of the room. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam moving with me. The corner was empty, but there was something on the wall, writing carved directly into the wood. As my light hit it, I could make out the words, "We sing, we wait, we watch them learn our song, now we watch you." The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath, and there was something else in the beam of my flashlight, something that shouldn't have been there. Footprints appearing in the dust, coming towards me, small like a child's. I ran down the stairs across the porch to my car. I fumbled with my keys, looking back at the house. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening across the dead land, and in every window of that dead house, I saw them. Dark figures, dozens of them. Their faces black voids. They were singing. I got the car started and sped away, gravel spraying behind me. It wasn't until I was back on the highway that I realized I was still clutching Rebecca's composition book. That was 3 days ago. I haven't slept much since then. The book sits on my desk as I write this, and sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear paper rustling like someone turning pages. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that I'm starting to understand the words they were singing. They come to me in dreams, in the shower, in quiet moments at work. A hymn I've never heard before, but somehow know by heart. And this morning, I found my own handwriting in Rebecca's book. Page after page of the same words. I hear them singing, I hear them singing, I hear them singing. I'm going back to the ranch tomorrow. I have to. Because now I understand what happened to the Whitakers. Why there were no signs of struggle. Why all their shoes were still by the door. They walked out together, following the singing. And now I know all the words. The singing hasn't stopped. 3 days since I fled the Whitaker place, and it's still there, humming just beneath my thoughts. But I'm fighting it. Had to understand what I'm up against. I spent all night in the archives, digging deeper than ever before. My head pounds and my hands shake, but I keep going. The song wants me to stop looking, wants me to just listen and follow. But that's not who I am. I've spent my life uncovering buried truths, and I'll be damned if I let some century-old hymn change that. The more I resist the song, the more I can think clearly. Started recording everything in this journal. Writing helps. Keeps my thoughts ordered. Keeps me focused on facts instead of that haunting melody. Found something in an old missionary's journal from 1855, decades before the Whitakers. He wrote about a strange religious sect that settled in the North Canyon, said they practiced something called the Eternal Congregation. But here's the thing. He wrote that they all disappeared one night, leaving their shoes lined up neatly outside their tents. Just like the Whitakers, boots by their door. My hands are shaking as I write this, but not from fear. It's rage. Rage at whatever took those people. The Whitakers weren't the first victims. They were just another verse in this goddamn song. The composition book sits on my desk. Rebecca's book. New words keep appearing in it, but I refuse to read them. Sealed it in a document preservation bag. Even through the plastic, I can hear the pages rustling at night, like something's writing in it. Last night, I saw them, the figures, standing in the corners of my apartment, their faces like black holes, pulling at my vision. The song got so loud I thought my head would split. But I didn't run. Instead, I turned on every light I had, sat down at my desk, and started writing down everything I knew about the Whitaker case. They didn't like that. The figures drew closer. The song became deafening. But with each fact I wrote down, each piece of evidence I documented, they seemed to fade a little, like the truth itself was pushing them back. I'm going back to the ranch tomorrow. Not because the song is calling me, because I need answers, but this time, I'm prepared. Spent today gathering supplies, audio recording equipment, cameras, UV lights. If these things have been taking people for over a century, there has to be evidence, has to be a pattern. The song might be supernatural, but the disappearances left physical traces. Ranch records, property deeds, sales patterns. My head is pounding. The hymn keeps changing, trying to find the notes that will break my resolve. Sometimes it sounds like my mother's voice, sometimes like a whole choir. But I keep thinking about Clayton Whitaker's last journal entry. He wrote that they chose to walk out that door. That's the key. Choice. Whatever this is, it needs people to choose to join its congregation. It can't just take, it has to convince. The figures are back now, standing in my office doorway, more than before. But I'm not afraid anymore. Every time the song gets louder, I focus on the evidence, the documents, the facts. This isn't about faith or devotion. It's about something ancient and hungry, wearing the skin of religion to lure people in. Tomorrow, I go back to the North Canyon, not to join their rows, but to document everything, to understand what's really happening on that dead land. The song is screaming in my head now, trying to drown out my thoughts. But I won't stop writing, won't stop investigating, because I finally understand what I am to them. Not just another potential member of their congregation. I'm a threat, the first person in over a century to hear their song and say no, to choose documentation over devotion, to fight back. The sun's coming up. The figures are fading, but I can still see them watching, waiting. Let them watch. Let them sing their damned song. I'm going to find out what happened to the Whitakers, what happened to everyone who disappeared into those rows of waiting figures. And I'm going to make sure the world knows the truth, even if I have to tear that dead land apart with my bare hands to find it. The third time I returned to the Whitaker Ranch, I brought mining maps. It took me a week to track them down. Geological surveys from 1875 before the railroad companies gave up on the area. The surveyors marked something interesting, a network of limestone caves running beneath the entire property. They marked them as unstable, not suitable for rail support. But that's not what caught my eye. In the margin, in faded pencil, strange echoes from northern cave system. Sound carries wrong. Men refuse to enter after sunset. Native guides call it the singing stone. The song's still in my head, but it's different now. Angry, like it knows I'm close to something. The figures stand closer each night, their void faces watching as I work. But I've learned something. They can't touch my notes, can't interfere with written words. Documentation is like poison to them. I went back to the ranch at dawn. The house looked different somehow, smaller, less imposing, like it was just a prop, a distraction from what was really important. I headed straight for the North Canyon. The cave entrance was right where the maps showed it would be, half hidden behind a century's worth of brush. The closer I got, the louder the singing became. But now I could hear something underneath it, a deeper sound like the earth itself humming. I switched on my headlamp and entered. The beam seemed to die a few feet in, like the darkness was eating the light, but I kept going. The song wanted me to turn back. That told me I was going the right way. The first chamber was natural limestone, nothing unusual, but as I went deeper, things changed. The walls became too smooth, too regular, and there were marks, thousands of them, running along the walls in patterns, not random scratches. Writing, the oldest writing I'd ever seen. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a glint of metal, an old oil lamp, Dutch-made, probably from the 1890s. Next to it, a leather satchel, remarkably well preserved in the dry cave air. The name on the inner flap, C. Whitaker. Inside, I found a journal, different from the one in his study. This one was older, started before they bought the ranch. As I read, my hand started shaking. Clayton Whitaker wasn't just some rancher. He was an archaeologist, working unofficially for the Smithsonian. He'd been tracking a pattern of disappearances across Texas, following legends of singing lands and standing congregations. The ranch purchase was just a cover. The journal entries were meticulous. He'd traced similar incidents back to the 1700s. Spanish missionaries wrote about entire Native American villages where people would suddenly start singing an unknown hymn, then walk into the wilderness, never to be seen again. The same pattern repeated with settler communities, always starting with the children hearing singing, always ending with empty homes and shoes left behind. But Clayton had found something the others hadn't. The signs weren't just in Texas, they appeared across the world, in Hungary, in Japan, in Egypt, always near cave systems, always accompanied by reports of singing. The deeper I went into the cave, the more I found. Recent items first, toys belonging to the Whitaker children. Then older things, Spanish coins, stone tools, clay pots, all arranged in neat rows, like offerings. The final chamber was massive. My light couldn't reach the ceiling, but what it did show stopped my heart. Rows upon rows of stone figures stretching back into the darkness, hundreds of them, thousands. Each one carved with incredible detail, showing people from every era, indigenous hunters, Spanish missionaries, pioneer families, all standing, all singing. At the very back, barely visible in my failing light, stood 6 figures. A family in late Victorian dress, the Whitakers, captured in stone. Their faces were peaceful, serene, behind them empty spaces in the row, waiting. Then I saw the carvings behind the statues. Massive glyphs spiraling across the wall in dizzyingly complex patterns. And in the center, a scene carved so deep it seemed to float off the stone, figures emerging from the ground itself, their mouths open in song, calling to the stars. This wasn't just some local haunting. The Whitakers hadn't just stumbled onto a cursed piece of land. They'd found something older. Something that had been calling to people since before humans built cities, before we had written language. The song in my head changed again. Not angry now, triumphant. Like it thought I finally understood, finally would accept my place in the rows. But that's not why I came down here. I pulled out my camera, started documenting everything. The statues, the carvings, the artifacts. The song rose to a deafening pitch. The darkness itself seemed to writhe. But I kept going. Every flash of the camera pushed the darkness back a little more. That's when I saw the truth. The statues weren't statues at all. They were husks, empty shells of people, transmuted somehow into living stone. And they were still singing, still waiting, still receiving the song from whatever lay deeper beneath the earth. I could feel it pulling at me, the desire to join them, to add my voice to their eternal choir, to stand in the rows and sing forever. But I had something they didn't, something Clayton Whitaker discovered too late, the power of documentation, of recording, of bearing witness. I took out my journal and wrote everything I saw, every detail, every truth. The darkness recoiled from my written words like they burned. The song faltered, because that's what it fears most. Not denial, not disbelief, but being known, being recorded, being understood. I spent hours photographing, measuring, sketching. With each note I took, the song grew weaker. The darkness retreated further. By the time I finished, I could barely hear the hymn at all. When I emerged from the cave, it was sunset. The figures stood waiting, dozens of them, their void faces turned toward me. But they seemed smaller somehow, less certain. I held up my camera, my journal. I know what you are now, I told them, and I'm going to tell everyone. They flickered like bad television reception. The song gave one final desperate surge, and they vanished. That was 2 weeks ago. I've spent every day since organizing my evidence, writing my report. The song still comes sometimes late at night, but it's weak now, distant, like a radio signal from too far away. I'm publishing everything, the photos, the journals, the maps, all of it. Let others come verify my findings. Let them do their own research. The more eyes on this, the more documentation, the weaker it becomes. Because that's how you fight something like this. Not with prayers or salt lines or exorcisms, but with knowledge, with truth, with the written word. The Whitakers aren't coming back. Neither are any of the others. They're part of something older than humanity now, something we might never fully understand. But we can remember them, record their stories, keep them alive in words and pictures and deeds. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep others from joining those endless rows. Final note, the caves are still there, the song still sings, but now you know what it is, what it wants, and knowledge, as they say, is power. If you hear singing in the deadlands of Texas, don't run, don't hide. Just start writing, keep writing, never stop, because as long as we keep telling the story, it can't make us part of it.